Hi everyone, welcome to our first Opportunity in Action event, Ask Me Anything. This event is for you, our WSOS scholars, to ask questions to leading professionals in Washington State. You can ask anything you want, but please respect our guests and keep a certain level of professionalism. Feel free to type in any of your questions in the chat box to the right. And without further ado, I will introduce our first guest, Jane Park, founder and chief girlfriend of Julep Beauty and WSOS board member. So Jane, thank you so much for being here.
Super excited to be here.
To get us started, could you just give us a little bit of your background, maybe for our scholars who don't know, what is your role with WSOS?
So I am on the board, which means that we sort of cheerlead the amazing team and try to ask good questions from time to time. And, you know, so far they've always had amazing answers, but I think it's really the role of the board to be supportive and to help with the overall issues of financing and to spearhead and try to get the community more involved in WSOS. And that's been super exciting for me. I started out with WSOS because we at Julep were in such dire need of graduates from STEM professions or STEM degrees, and I could see that it really made sense to be supportive of an organization that was really dedicated to that, but also, and really importantly, I am an immigrant myself. And when I actually first moved to Canada with my parents, I was 4 years old and I didn't speak English when I first went to school. So I feel like I have a lot of empathy for the zaniness that college can be, that it seems like it should be all straightforward, but so many degrees that require application within the 4 years that you're there. And there's so many struggles that I know a lot of first generation college goers go through, including just juggling the expense. So I am just cheerleading all of you guys on too.
And we are so thankful for your support. I know so many of our scholars really look up to you. So I'd like to dig into that kind of past and history a little bit more. Could you start at the beginning and describe what a young Jane Park was like and what your early childhood was like?
So, even a step back before that, so my dad was a refugee from the Korean War. So he was 9 years old when the border between North and South Korea went up, and he was at school and then was walking home, and that's where the border was. So he hasn't been home since. He's 75 now, and there was a brother and sister and his parents on the north. So he grew up as an orphan. He built himself a mud hut, and we actually went back to the kind of near the DMZ, and we found it, and my kids got to see it. Somebody had added sort of like this shell on top, and my dad was like, wow, they did renovations. But he dug up sweet potatoes that were left behind on the farm. When you have a farm, you don't end up sort of harvesting everything, and that's what he ate during the cold winter. And when we were at the hut, this guy comes over and he says, hey, I used to know the boy who lived here, and he was the best fed orphan because he came to ask for food after dinner. So most kids came to beg for food during dinner when they're hungry because they're kids, right? And my dad would come after and offer to help clean up and sort of eat scraps. And that was just, he was like, that was so smart. And so my dad was like, I was that kid. And so then these two Korean men in their 70s, 80s start crying. And I have this all on flip video, which I'm not sure what to do with now. I have the little device. I've got to figure out how to get it off of that onto something else. But that was my dad's history. And I think because of that, he always raised us to think that we could do whatever. If you think about somebody who came from that background, and it usually takes something like 6 generations for people to move out of poverty and into sort of a more solid socioeconomic class. And there are things that can be done, in particular like WSOS, to kind of speed up the process where you don't have to wait 6 generations. And, some of that was my parents being brave to move to a country where you don't speak the language and take this risk just in order to provide a better life. And in particular, because of education. They really wanted me to get the best education I could have access to. And they made all of these sacrifices. And all of you who are children of immigrants, I know the burden you bear on that too, to feel like, wow, my parents have sacrificed so much now. What do I do with this opportunity? How do I really rise to this challenge? So, I am here to say that I know it can feel lonely sometimes, but there's so many opportunities that are available to you. Just remember to thank your parents.
Oh, yeah. Well, we do have a lot of young STEM graduates in our program. Maybe some of them can help you out with that flip video.
Right. Yeah. Digital transition.
Right. So during that transition, coming from South Korea, what were some of the challenges you faced and how did you overcome those?
There were, I think, a lot of things that I think in my life I have freedom around. It's because, as immigrants, you're always moving between two different cultures, right? So my culture at home was all Korean and different foods and different traditions, and then you go to school and there's a whole different set of rules. And in a lot of ways, I think America is going through this now with this pace of technological change, that there is sort of an America that you think of in your head as what it should be or what it was, but every day you're kind of immigrating into a new culture because the world is changing so rapidly. And a lot of immigrants are caught in the middle. Like my parents are always like, Korea's like this and Korea's like that. And then we went and I was like, it's like none of what you said because they haven't lived there in, 30 years. They don't know what it's like anymore. It's changed so rapidly that it's unrecognizable to them. And I think that feeling of, I don't know, I don't belong here, I don't belong there, where do I belong, is something that has actually been really helpful to me to sort of creatively navigate that and realize, well, once there's two sets of rules, you realize that there's not only one. And so then there can be more and there can just be your set. So I didn't speak English, as I was saying, when I went to school. And my Korean name is Hyosang, which actually means obedience, which is a really poor name for me. But I was really sad that nobody could pronounce it and they didn't know how to spell it. And so I actually picked my name Jane from a Dick and Jane book. I wanted literally the plainest thing that people couldn't mispronounce. And I think my parents were like, actually, I don't even think I asked them. They went into a parent-teacher conference and my teacher started saying, well, Jane this and Jane that. And they were like, excuse me, who are you talking about? And then it took them a while to be like, oh, is that what she's calling herself at school? Right. And then they just went with it. And I think I got it on a library card and then I got it on a driver's license as a second name. And then I gradually moved it onto my passport as a first name. So it was, never like a fully legal change, right, but something that at 5 years old I decided to do. And I don't think I would let my children do that now. It would sort of be a little bit of, hey, this is your heritage, it's your name, like you don't get to change that.
Yeah, but it's amazing that you had that awareness at just 5 years old that like that could help you socially, and it's really sad that that is the result. But did your parents ever adopt Americanized names?
They tried to. It was funny when they went on a cruise. They call themselves in Korean, it's like Mother of Jane is what they say, like Jane Oma. But so they never call each other their own first names. Mm-hmm. But they thought when they went on this cruise, well, all these Americans are going to be like, but that's really strange that you don't know your own names. And so they made up these English names for each other. Oh boy. And they couldn't remember them, and they like had to get together and play like the name games to try to remember. And my mom her name in Korean is Unho, and it means silver. And so they wanted to call her Silver, but then she started crying because she remembered that when they immigrated, the immigration officer who had actually lied to her and said that she wasn't allowed to go to college, which wasn't true. Once you're a citizen, you can. But he had said, we take immigrants so that you do the work that other people don't want to do. And they told her that he told her that she couldn't go to college, and then that she also had to change her name to Silver, and she didn't want to. And then it turned out years later she found out that she could have, and so she was like, I don't want Silver. And then she was born in April, and she said, maybe your name should be April, and somebody else took April, so then she ended up being May. Her English name ended up being randomly, that's a long way to say May, but they don't go by it because they can't remember the English names they gave each other.
Yeah, my mom was also an immigrant, and when she came here, she adapted her name to be more English sounding, but everyone just calls her Mom anyway, so. So going back to your experience and your transition as you moved here, it sounded like there was an expectation from your parents to attend college. For a lot of students, there is that expectation from a very early age, but that's not always the case for everyone. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how your family viewed education and how that impacted your choices as you were deciding whether to go to college and where you would go on from there.
Well, for my family, it was key. It was everything that they sacrificed for, so that was a focus. Not that they knew anything about university or how to apply. It was just sort of education is important in a big sense, and so that was something that was always a priority. My parents, when we lived in these small apartments when we first immigrated, they would always pick one next to a library so that I could read lots of books. And I remember one library I read like the entire kids section from A to Z, really just skipping over sci-fi and things that I really didn't like. But I could kind of point. I can still see it in my head, the whole section. And there was like a summer reading list thing, and I had the most books that they had ever seen ever. Because I actually think it wasn't legal what they did. They would like drop me off at 9 o'clock on a Saturday when they had to work, and I was like 6 with a lunch, and I would just sit there all day. Like now I think somebody might call Child Protective Services or something. But
you managed to turn out all right though.
Exactly, right? There's a huge range of things you can do as a parent, and your kids will turn out fine.
Yeah, and you turned out brilliant. Were there other factors besides your family expectations that encouraged you to go to college?
I think my teachers and the schools that I was in, they had always been really encouraging, and so it wasn't so much a question of if, it was more a question of how and where, and how much student debt to take out.
So do you think you made the right choice? Was there anything you would have done differently regarding college?
I don't know that I knew how to ask the right question. So I went to Princeton undergrad, and it was an amazing academic experience. Culturally, it was probably a little bit, less diverse than I would have liked. And I think a lot of people struggle with that you walk in and there aren't as many people who look like you, or as many people who have never been to Europe, or lots of things that seem very different. But as in every environment, you only need 3 or 4 friends to make it your own, to create a space for yourself where you get to be yourself. So I think that's sort of my advice to anybody going to college, is just look for 3 to 4 people who can help you make it home.
Great. Well, one of our viewers sent in a question. Like you mentioned, it's hard to go into a place where you don't see many faces like your own. So what advice would you give to women in technology?
I think it's really important to realize that mentors can look different from you. So a lot of my mentors all my life actually have been men, and I hope that the generation of women who are in college now will have more women mentors, but don't look for the perfect person. Like me, when I grow up, is sort of what I thought my mentor should be. I'm looking for somebody who has my experience and my background, and in whose footsteps I can follow. And I don't think that that's realistic. I think you can learn about how to communicate from one person. You can learn from somebody else about different professional sort of tactics, or you can learn subject matter from different people. But you can have mentors from a lot of different places. And you don't have to call them your mentors, right? You can just sort of establish relationships. You can just learn from them. You can just have a notebook and say, this is something that noticed was really effective that I saw this person do. And so I think the way to make the world a little bit more yours and make it less lonely is to think about the fact that everybody is mentoring you. Like, how lucky are you?
Right. Yeah, and WSOS itself has a Skills That Shine mentorship program. So if you're a third, fourth, or fifth year scholar, ask your advisor about how you can be involved in that program where you get to pick a professional mentor. And that mentorship really makes a big difference. So we have another question from our students. When you entered college, how did you choose your major? And did you ever struggle with that? What did you want to study? What led to that decision?
I sort of wimped out. I did this major in public policy, which actually meant that I got to take a little bit of everything, a little bit of economics, a little bit of politics, a little bit of, humanities. There was like a lot of different topics that I got to sort of pursue. And even in law school, my husband likes to tease me that I got all these exceptions to take classes in the business school, and I took an architecture class, and I continued Korean language classes. He was like, "Are you even taking classes at the law school?" So, I think it's really important. The subject matter that you need, especially in STEM degrees, where there are prerequisites and then there are a lot of requisites. For the times that you have freedom or within the subject matter, I think it's really great to kind of go with people who care about teaching, who really care about students, who are known to be good teachers. I say that about jobs too. There's so many different companies. If you can find somebody who you want to work for and can learn from, that's a huge way to make decisions around courses. I took classes in, for my free classes, like in Middle Eastern women's literature. I never thought I would, but it was a phenomenal professor who was teaching me how to think better, and I think that's such a great luxury. If you have the chance to take classes wherever you have choice, go with the best professors.
And is there one class that really stuck out to you as your favorite class in your college career?
Right on the tip of my tongue, I want to say ceramics.
Really?
I took this great pottery class, and they gave us keys to the studio, so you could go in the middle of the night and just sort of do it whenever you wanted to. And then I continued taking some classes when I was in Washington, D.C. With this local potter, and I said to her, "Hey, Jill, I used to have keys to the studio." And she was like, "Hey, Jane, if you pay me $20,000 a year, I'll give you keys too."
All right. Well, with the experience and knowledge that you've acquired through those experiences in college, would you have done anything differently?
Oh, that's a hard question. I can think of very little in my life I would have done differently. I think the times that I do have regrets, it's all around not taking care of myself enough. Like, I went to Korea for my very first project with the Boston Consulting Group. So they sent me to interview the CIO of Samsung, which is kind of crazy. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. And instead of asking if I could stay there an extra day to stay over and hang out with my grandmother, I felt like, oh, well, my boss would have totally told me if I could have. And so I was in Korea. I had flown all this way, and I was there just for 12 hours. I landed in the morning, did the interview, and left, and never thought to just ask, what's the worst that could have happened? He could have said, no, sorry, we really don't have time this time. Or he might have said, yes, I will never know. So I have regrets like that. I think most of the people I talk to later in their careers, when they have regrets, it's around failures to sort of do things like that, or failures of character, when you are unkind in a way. And mostly the times that I have failures like that, it's because I'm sleep deprived or you're busy. It's time is the enemy of all the kindness I mean to express in my life. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that I regret. I think everything else is just learning, like the way that you turn a mistake into a lesson. It doesn't just automatically happen, right? When people are like, it's not a mistake, it's a lesson. Well, if a mistake falls in a forest and you do nothing about it, you guys, it stays a mistake. The way you turn it into a lesson is you look at it and you think, here's what I'm going to do better next time. And maybe you will have a next time with that same person or that same class. Maybe it's too late for that experience and you can take the lesson and apply it to the next class. But whenever you are beating yourself up like, I should have done this differently, maybe you should have. You can't turn back time. But what you can do is take that into the next time that situation presents itself and promise yourself the next time this happens, I'm going to do it differently. And that's how you turn a mistake into a lesson. Otherwise, it kind of just stays a mistake.
Right. Yeah, that's a super valuable lesson to learn, how to take those failures. UW really emphasizes failing forward, and I think that really embodies that message. So back to your early career or college life, if you volunteered, interned, or worked while you were studying, how did those experiences impact your overall academic or college experience? Because I know a lot of our scholars are very involved, and it may be kind of difficult for them to balance all these different things. Do you have any advice on how to handle that?
I think it's great to open yourself up to as much as you have the capacity to take on. I think of it as engagement for me. What do I need in my life to feel engaged and alive across everything? So if you're taking a class that you have to take and you are not super engaged in it, how can you find other moments of engagement in your college life, whether it's friends or other things that you do? I worked on this organization called the Rainforest Conservancy when I was in college, and I think of all the things that I did. I remember that more than the classes, and we were trying to set up chapters at other college campuses and conserve this land in Belize that had all of this biodiversity. And so it was great to all the skills that I learned there, I think I carried on to jobs in a way that was much more concrete. I can't tell you a calculus formula now. I can't, there's so much about the sort of the grades that you get that you don't necessarily carry with you the materials, but you carry with you the confidence that you can get all of that done. You carry with you the ability to think and to communicate with other people and hopefully to write better. I think that's an important skill for everybody today, even if it's something as short as an email or a text in the work context. Being able to be succinct and ask for what you want in a in a clear and effective way is so critical. And these are all things you're practicing in college.
Okay, well, great. And then after college, how did you move into your first career? What was your first job after college?
So this is I wanted to work on this women's cooperative in India. It was in the province of Udaipur. It was called Seva Mandir, and they had it was an eco cooperative. Anyway, I applied to law school as a way to sort of assuage my parents that I was going to come back, because I knew that they would freak out if I was like, hey, I'm going to India. And so I was never going to go to law school. I just said, I'm going to, go do this. And I'd never seen my parents cry before. They cried and they said, we immigrated so you could have a great education, and now you got into law school. You have to do that first. And so I caved. This whole thing that was just supposed to be a ruse became the plan, and I went. Actually, the follow-up to that, how I made that, and it wasn't a mistake, but how I made that into a lesson, is that when I started Julep, they also were super unhappy. They were like, another Korean starting a nail business. What will we tell our friends? And they didn't want me to be in business, although I really was. I'd left the law, but they said, hey, business is hard. We don't want you to be in business. And so, but I remembered what happened the first time and how easily I caved. And so I was like, I think this is survivable. It'll be okay, Mom and Dad. Here's a tissue. I went off to start Julep. So, these lessons come back. Sometimes it's decades later, but they help you later.
And before you started Julep, at one point you were a Starbucks executive. So what made you want to shift and start your own company?
At the time, I actually had 2 kids, and I think I had my second child, and I thought, is this all there is to life? Now, finally I'd like paid off my student debt. It took about a decade. I had, we bought our first house, we had 2 kids, and then I was like, is this what I do until I die? Right. Is this it? So I think I had an early midlife crisis. And for me, it just meant that I really was impatient to have the kind of engagement at work that I had at home. So that's always been my true north, has been how do I stay engaged? What is exciting me? And so I started Julep with the idea of, if it doesn't work out, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I think that's a great question for you to ask whenever you're stuck on something, like, should I major in this? Should I take this class? What's the worst thing that could happen? You get a C. Is that going to kill you? Does that, is it worth it to take the risk? And even for jobs, if it doesn't work out, companies, if it doesn't work out, you have your health, you can go back and do whatever else you were doing at the time. So I think that's a really powerful question. If you don't ask it and then just get scared, if you actually ask it rigorously and say, let's pretend this happened, can I survive it? And it's actually pretty powerful, because almost always the answer is yes.
Wow. And when you started Julep, why makeup?
Well, actually, I started Julep as a clean green nail parlor. So the inspiration behind this has always been about empowering women without an idea of perfection, but really sort of how do we do things differently. So when we started out in the parlors, it was really saying, hey, we shouldn't force workers to breathe in toxic fumes and all of the dust particles that go along with artificial nails. So it was really about women should be able to get together with other women, have a space of our own, because we would go out to like basketball games, and I'm not really a sports person, or if you go to a spa, then you're sort of like naked, and that's a little bit too much for a business relationship. Or you're not together, right? If you're in massages in different rooms, it's not really a bonding experience. So I really wanted to create a social beauty experience, and that's what we started in the parlors, and then we took that online as we started creating products. It was really about how to do things as a community together. I think the most exciting thing about technology today is enabling companies to break down the walls between the company and the customer and to work collaboratively together. And hopefully we'll see that more in government. I think that's how technology can fuel stronger, more collaborative organizations.
Right. And then, so what does Julep mean? Where did the name come from?
It's kind of short. It's a cocktail. You guys, right? I love my girlfriends, and I love me a good cocktail. But also, I did actually brainstorm a set of 5 names. And interestingly, from the beginning, the idea of empowering women and having this be a different kind of cosmetics and beauty company was throughout the whole thing. So it wasn't the number one in terms of, I asked 2 questions. I just said, would you buy beauty products and services from a company named this? And the second question was, what does it make you think of? And it was open-ended. So the more powerful answer to the first one was Scarlet. Actually, that was one of the ideas, and it had whatever off the charts intent to purchase. But then when I asked what does it make you think of, it was very, some of them were great things, like the Scarlet Letter, rebellious, sexy, strong, independent. But some of those are all great things, but it wasn't what I wanted for Julep. Right. So the name Julep really evoked sitting on a porch together with my girlfriends, like kind of a Sex and the City moment, or the Kentucky Derby. And when I saw those words, it was like, that's what I want. That's the company I want.
And as Julep started to take shape, how did you balance your family expectations with what you wanted?
Not very well on any given day. I do like to say that balance to me is about a balance of engagement, and it's also about can you in a quarter really sort of have the parenting and spouse and work experiences that you want. So on any given day, I might have to make a sacrifice. I might have to travel to the East Coast, or I might not see my kids. So on that day, if you're like, are you a great mom? It's like, I don't know. I haven't spent any time being a mom really today. But over the course of, a couple months, did you have experiences and conversations that are rewarding to you as a parent and are helpful to your kids, hopefully? I think that thinking about time in a more flexible way than on any given day. I think having it all is a kind of crazy question made up by people who are trying to make us miserable. Mm-hmm. But definitely trying to have it all in one day is an impossibility. So if you can give yourself a little bit more leeway to achieve that in a reasonable period of time, I think it's sort of going back and filling the well when you've pushed it too far. When I've, put my husband last for, a series of decisions, and it's time to go back and sort of think, okay, what can I do to make sure he knows I appreciate him and make him first in a few decisions, and managing all of these. I think of it more like cups, and when they get too empty, how do you refill it a little bit and sort of watch all of your cups and make sure that you're not draining anyone that's super important to you.
Oh, great. So I'm going to take a couple questions from our audience. Someone wants to know, what are your thoughts about taking a gap year?
I think it's amazing. Some of my most incredible employees have had the experience of challenging themselves with, what are you doing with a gap year? If you're taking a gap year to lie on a couch, no. But if you're doing it to have an exciting experience while you're young, while you're, you might have fewer financial obligations, or you don't have kids yet, or whatever else it is, go out and do something outside of your comfort zone, and then bring that confidence back to what you're doing to finish school and to sort of be a stronger professional, build a stronger career. So I think that the criteria is do something worthwhile that is going to expand you outside your comfort zone.
Great. And another student is asking, what do you look for when hiring young professionals? What makes someone stand out in an interview?
That's a great question. I know that there's a whole training on this that WSOS does, so hopefully I'm not saying anything that contradicts that. But for me, running a smaller, fast, high-growth business, something I look for is this person thinking about how they fit into the organization and what they can contribute. What I really don't want, which is actually something that I suffered from when I first started working, is somebody who comes in looking for, how do I get the next A, right? Because that doesn't happen at work. We don't give out gold stars. You are just all in it together and trying to achieve a goal. And so if you can come in with an attitude of, how can I help you? How can I be of service? What can I do to make your life easier? I love hiring people. I mean, often when I'm hiring people, it's not directly reporting to me. Sometimes it's reporting to someone who reports into me. And then what I love is if I can see how they can help somebody on my team be more successful, be less stressed, free them to do more of the things that can help us achieve our overall goals. So how can you present yourself as somebody who understands the broader context? And I have to say, I wasn't necessarily great at that. Like, I sometimes just went to interviews because I got them on campus. I didn't do enough research on who the background of the company was. Even when I was applying for venture capital funds to grow Julep, often I would just go and do whatever interviews that I got. And I got a lot of them because I was, like Princeton, Yale, Starbucks. I was at BCG. Like, with that, pedigree, I got a lot of interviews. But it still didn't mean I would get the money, because maybe they weren't a consumer fund, or maybe they didn't understand what I did. Why didn't I take the time to understand what they did, and understand that there wouldn't be a fit? Just sometimes you get so busy and you're like, who am I to turn down interview opportunities? So you go. But if they're not the right fit, then they're not going to be the right fit, and you can't change that. So I think thinking about who really, like taking the time to understand who they are, walking in with a sense of what the organization is that you're interviewing with, who the person is, and asking, who was the best employee you can think of, like what characteristics that they have, what things do you think that, how can I contribute, how can I help you? And it's great to ask questions that, whether it works out or not, you walk out with something else at the end of the day, right? If you ask, like, describe to me your favorite employee ever, then you guys will get a sense of how people think about good employees in different contexts. So whether you get the job or not, it's time, so you should use it wisely and get something out of it that will help you.
Yeah, and a lot of jobs, students now know that a lot of job opportunities come out of not just applying for a job and waiting for those interviews, but having a really strong network and knowing people who can provide those opportunities for them. So how would you suggest that a WSOS scholar goes about creating these networks and these connections during their university years?
I think it's just everybody and anybody. Be friendly and professional. You definitely leverage whatever sort of network that there is, and the board, the staff at WSOS. If you have somebody you want to meet, go ask them, right? And I think for the most part, if somebody asks for a cup of coffee, I might not be able to do it today. Again, it's a time thing. I might not be able to do it today. I might not be able to do it this week, but I will try to make the time sometime in the next month. So if you ask a question that is like, hey, could I just grab 30 minutes for a cup of coffee with you over, sometime in the next month, like make it hard for them to say no. And especially, and then do your homework. I think it's great if you have a why, if it's not just like, oh, because I saw your name and title. If you're like, hey, I saw that you grew up in Toronto and I did too, right? Like if there's like something a little bit more, then we're all people at the end of the day, and it helps if you can, if you do your homework and ask the question in the right way, and don't take advantage of people, I think it's hard for people to say no. Like Daryl Cavins, who is the CEO of Zulily, is a friend of mine now, but when I first got to know him, and I had only met him once, I called him up one night kind of late and I said, you are the only person in the world that I know that I can ask this question to, because it was about fundraising and I didn't know anybody else who had gone through it in the same way he had. So that was pretty hard for him to say no, right? Yeah. And it's like, you're the only person in the world that I know, and I have a question that I want to talk over with you. So that made him feel special. It was true. And so it was like, I wasn't just sprinkling everybody in the world with the same question. I was really being targeted, and I knew that I was asking for something in his time that was precious. So I think if you approach it that way, networking is not about having a million names in your Rolodex, because you won't remember them and they won't remember you. It's really about forming a real connection. Like, who's this person, and how are they going to be interested in championing you? Because you do need to be championed.
Yeah, especially as a woman in color in business, that might be particularly important to have other people championing for you. So can you describe some of the successes and challenges that also came along with being a woman of color in business?
This is an interesting question. I was just thinking about how I would say talk about this with my daughter, who's 14, because I thought that the world would be farther along by the time I had a daughter and she was in high school. It hasn't, the change hasn't come as rapidly as I would have liked, in terms of when you look at women in the higher echelons of business or technology or in boardrooms. I had expected the progress to be faster. I am listening to Michelle Obama's book right now, Becoming, on audio tape, and she talks about how she was always told you have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. and I haven't used those words directly with my kids, although my parents did with me. And it's something that I'm thinking about. There are definitely challenges out there. I've definitely been taken off projects because I was pregnant. We've all faced, different levels of people not taking you seriously. But also I've had the good fortune of having people who will take me seriously. I think like the best thing you can do is lean into the people who do see more in you and trust them. If somebody sees something in you, don't sort of dismiss it like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. That's something that I often did. It's like, well, if you see something great in me, then you must be really dumb and not know what you're talking about. And, and I wouldn't take that as seriously. So if somebody does take you seriously, take them seriously. They know what they're talking about, and lean into the good people, and brush off the ones who are not in your corner. It's hard to get people like that to change and to be in your corner. So find people who are in your corner and lean into them, and don't let the detractors pull you down.
Yeah, that's really great advice. A lot of our students come from a really diverse backgrounds, and I think all of them could benefit from kind of following this similar mindset that you have just explained. A few students are asking, how much do the lessons in college translate to the real world? And how much does a degree limit you to one field? A lot of them are in very specialized fields, and maybe they might find out that their passion's not in that. So how would you suggest that they kind of figure out their role in the real world after college?
I don't think college has, can I say this? Am I going to be in trouble from WSOS? Much at all to do with real life, except how you grow your moral core and how you grow your resilience and your ability to see your role in the world. Those are important things. What you learn on any given class, how you do on any given test, I don't think prepares you one way or another. So it's, it really is about, if you could learn one thing, it's about how do you become resilient? Mm-hmm. How do you take risks, and what happens when it doesn't turn out your way, and how do you pick yourself up and do the next thing? Because that's what every day at work is like. Almost every hour I say something that I think, oh, I could have said that better, or, I think I could have appreciated this person more, or I could have been less frustrated by this challenge. So there are always things that you can do better. But I don't think it's really about the specific class. It's really about how you take the challenges that you have every day and every hour, and how you have the resilience to pick yourself up, forgive yourself, turn that mistake into a lesson, and keep moving forward. So if you have opportunities to do that in college, then that's awesome, and you should think of it that way. It's not just about the A, it's about growing your resilience.
Mm-hmm. And are there some specific experiences that you think are really valuable for college students to pursue to help them create that well-rounded resilience?
Anything that's outside your comfort zone. If there's a class, or if there's a student activity that's outside your comfort zone, if there's a sport and you're like, if you're interested in it, right? Don't just do it. Like if you hate it and it's outside your comfort zone, then it's not set up for success. If you have any interest in it and it's outside your comfort zone, try it, and give yourself that card of, this is, every semester, are you doing something where you're trying something new? Are you challenging yourself in some way, whether it's a subject matter or it's public speaking for, on behalf of a student organization, it's running for an office in a student organization, whatever it is. It might even just be networking. It might be meeting somebody, picking up the phone and cold calling, or trying to reach out to someone on LinkedIn. It might be something like that. But what's outside your comfort zone that you are a little bit interested in? And, I think it's great. I'm a big fan of keeping a journal of those things too, because you are your biggest you should be your biggest cheerleader. I know a lot of people I interview, especially young women, say, I'm my own worst critic.
Right.
And I'm always like, why? Like, there's a whole bunch of people out there who are going to criticize you. Like, the world is like full of critics. You don't need to be your own, Mm-hmm. You need to come up with the story of your life and your trajectory, even so far, even though most of you guys have stories that are just beginning. What's the story that makes sense to you? And when you have a challenge, how do you make sense of that story? Did you not get as good of a grade because you're dumb? Is that the story to yourself, which it shouldn't be? Is it because, hey, I had these challenges and I'm going to do better next time? Mm-hmm. Making sense, connecting the dots in a way that makes sense in your own head, I think is a really critical skill to gain to deal with challenges later on.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you encourage people to get outside of their comfort zone. Can you describe a recent time where you pushed yourself outside of your comfort zone?
I feel like every day I'm doing that as a parent of teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
I never had, I wasn't like the cool kid in high school, and I think my son sort of is. And so it's funny, like how intimate a relationship can be when you literally birth somebody from your body. And then you're like, wow, if I'm being really vulnerable, like, how do I approach this conversation with you? Like, what do I, and I think it's the same as in any human relationship. You try different things, you are, open, you have your heart trounced on sometimes, and you still pick yourself up and keep going. So I think that's my biggest point of vulnerability, because I feel like I felt really good as a parent of little kids. Mm-hmm. I'm really great with little kids, and it's super in my comfort zone. And when they stop being an accessory and they like have their own ideas, right. And then that's a new experience for me.
So when those things start to seem particularly difficult or unsurmountable in family or business, how do you motivate yourself and your team to overcome those challenges?
I think asking for help is really important. So honestly, I started seeing a therapist. I started wondering, like, when I get really angry about like little things like laundry on the floor or something, like, is this disproportionate? But also it's real, like to honor it, to be like, what I'm feeling, I can't change. How I think about and how I act, I can make modest changes, not completely, but how you feel is how you feel. So that was an important thing for me to understand, is that it wasn't about trying to change how I responded, but it's really changing what I do with that feeling and acting in ways that I would be more proud at the end of the day, and that it's a very sort of gradual change. Human experiences it's really hard to change your behavior, either your own or your bosses or your employees. I mean, I definitely found that where you go through the whole thing of giving feedback. So if people give you guys feedback, it's always hard to hear. Nobody likes detailed feedback, because it will definitely have things that you have to work on, because none of us are perfect. Mm-hmm. So if you are having good feedback, it will definitely have things that will sting. And the best feedback, in fact, will be the kind that like really sees into your soul, and it's like, oh my gosh, they got all these things that I know are areas for development for me, and so it will hurt even more in some ways that you weren't able to cover that up, that person sees it too. But hopefully they also see your strengths. The best feedback is, like, for me, has been the ones that can be painful, but also it feels real. Mm-hmm. It feels like a mirror, and what you do with that, whether you're like la la la, I can't hear it, or whether you can internalize it, think about it, and figure out what actionable thing you can do with it, because feedback is really a gift.
Right. And is there any one thing that you would say is your biggest weakness?
I have lots of things. Probably impatience. And the thing is that for almost everybody I know, this is a very basic thing, but once I learned it, it felt huge. your strength is often the flip side of your weakness.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of cases in which my impatience probably helped me start a company, helped me to, do things faster, more than I would have without it. So it's not itself a bad trait. It's that, how do I set myself in context so that I can lean into more of the positive side of that trait and know that it's, the cost that it has. There's always a cost to every trait that you have. And there's benefits, but there's also downfalls. And, you just have to manage that, knowing that it is you. I'm never going to not be impatient. Not that, I'm working on it, right? It's not like, but that's a core defining part of how I view the world, is an urgency and a lack of time. So how do I figure that out and set myself up in places where I'll be more successful?
Okay, we'll take one more question. One student is asking, how is STEM important in the cosmetics industry, and how is technology integrated into your work?
These days, there's such an online component to everything that companies do. So even in retail, even for a cosmetics company, what you can do in connecting with customers and creating an experience has everything to do with how you organize customer data, for example, how you add and append it, and how you make it accessible for your team much faster than it would ever have been possible before, so that in the service of serving your customers better. So when you want to delight customers and create great experiences for them, which is what retail and brands are all about, there's such a huge component of sort of the digital experience of that. And that's more back end, again, sort of how you hang on to data. And if somebody gives you data also, I feel like there's a obligation for the company to serve you better. It's like, I just went out on a date with you and I told you all the stuff about myself and I'm allergic to peanuts, and now you're going to order peanut curry? Like, we're not going on a date again. So it's like that. If somebody tells you things about themselves, how do you reflect that in how you serve them? And I think we're only at the forefront of these moments of connection that can make everything better, make every connection feel better, whether it's a retail purchase or it's, again, government agencies. What technology can do is really help shatter walls between people and help collaboration that makes innovation even more exciting. I think that's the best thing. And regardless of what kind of company you are, we have our biggest team is our technology, our engineering team, our software engineers. In the product, the physical product, we have chemical engineers, and there's all sorts of product stability testing and FDA clearing. So it runs through everything that we do.
Yeah. So scholars, if you really want to work for Julep. Well, we're running out of time here with our interview. Do you have any final advice for our scholars?
Gosh, so many things. But most of all, I think just remember that in the moments that are hard, not to be alone. I think that that's the biggest thing, that if you're on your own, it feels like shame. And the thing that shame can't survive is the light of connection. One of my favorite writers is Brene Brown, and she says that what you do when you're having that shame spiral moment of I shouldn't have, I screwed up this thing, is you pick up the phone and you call. Maybe I'm showing my age now. You pick up your phone and you text. You emoji. You're somebody who will view you without judgment, what you do for other people. And if you can have that conversation, there is no way that that shame will survive that. You will find a path forward. You will find a path to forgiving yourself. You'll find a better path. You'll find what was that experience meant to, why was it sent to you? I literally say that to myself all the time. What was this experience sent to teach me? and why, what piece, how does this fit into my life, and how do I take it with me in a positive way. So that's the thing, is we were so passionate as a board about supporting the scholar leads, because we really didn't want scholars to come and to be alone. I think that's my main message, is that no matter what you're experiencing, there is some web of connection between you and somebody else who's experienced that, or who can help you out of that. So just don't ever feel alone.
Yeah, and I love that I see a lot of that in your company as well. It's about bringing people together, and I think that's really beautiful. So thank you so much for having this interview with us and sharing your story with our scholars. I think we all have a lot to learn from you. Before we leave, I just want to give a quick reminder to our scholars that for 3rd, 4th, and 5th year students, you qualify to pick a professional mentor. We have mentors from Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft, Blue Origin, Kaiser Permanente, Google, Oracle, Parametrics, McKinsey, Avista, Uber, and the list goes on. So if you're interested in being connected with a professional mentor, please email Stan at skillsthatshine@waopportunityscholarship.org as soon as possible. And for our scholar leads, if you're interested in developing your public speaking skills, they are launching a Opportunity Out Loud program this January, so contact your success advisor if you'd like to get involved in that. Thank you again, Jane, for all of your hard work and everything you do for our scholars. And I hope everyone can join us next time for our next Opportunity in Action event.